Well, welcome everybody. It used to be that SMPTE standard numbers were only significant to the chief engineer in a broadcast facility, but all that has changed with SMPTE ST2110. Now, ST2110 has become the common abbreviation for the whole professional media over IP networks transition that our industry is undergoing. But ST2110, as you know, isn't a single standard. It's a suite of standards that individually address timing, video, audio, ancillary data streams, and that makes up the whole suite of ST2110. So today on this session, SMPTE ST2110, what's it all about? Steve Holmes and Kevin Salvidge will get into the challenges of IP monitoring, especially for ancillary data, give you a look at SMPTE's compressed versus uncompressed specifications, and common IP stumbling blocks, complexity, device interoperability, PTP, and more. So stay with us.
So thank you for the introduction, Cindy. So, Steve, let's start off by asking a question. And I put this one out there to people a while back, is what's the first thing you think of when you're asked about IP in broadcast? And this was the response.
Just a couple of things there, Kevin.
There are, but the one that most people mentioned and is the title for our session today, SMPTE 2110. And I suppose we should really start off by giving people a quick heads up about what you're about to get into if you're heading into the world of IP in 2110.
Most definitely, Kevin.
So I think, as you know, it's very unlikely that you're going to build a brand new greenfield or brownfield site that's going to be completely IP. And even if you do, I bet there's going to be that SDI cable in there somewhere.
I can guarantee you that. I've seen 100% builds that were IP, and within the first week, they had to pull out some SDI somewhere. Some of it was there wasn't monitors that took what they were doing. Some of it was just other devices, and SDI ended up showing up in a couple places.
So obviously, you know, our customers are going to have some form of migration, and it's probably a good point to start off with explaining the fundamental differences between SDI and IP.
Most definitely.
So SDI, you know, we've been using it now for over 30 years, and it's extremely reliable, robust, and incredibly well behaved, isn't it, Steve?
It is. It is. But it's been around for over 20 years. So it should be pretty well behaved and pretty well understood.
So you'll hear us describe things as being synchronous, deterministic, and it's still a fantastic transport mechanism, isn't it, for moving content from one point to another.
Yeah, and it's for the most part pretty much plug and play. You take two ends of a piece of coax, plug them in, and voila, everything's there.
IP, on the other hand, is a little bit more kind of, well, the great quote I saw is that obviously we're using packets now, and packets arrive when packets arrive.
Yes. Yeah, you know, the IP switch is a statistical multiplexer on its output, really, because you've got video, audio, ancillary data, maybe other traffic. If you're using, you know, more than one service coming down that pipe coming into you, and a packet can only go out the door from a single device. And if two packets come up at the same time, somebody's got to get in front of somebody else. So there's some differences that will happen randomly in IP, because you can't get out the door when you want to, and you got to get behind the packet in front of you.
So obviously this is going to be a challenge in our world of TV, where we have cameras that acquire content frame accurately, and it works all the way through the broadcast chain to a consumer's device that again is going to be viewing those frames sequentially and accurately. So yeah, packets arrive when packets arrive. We can get away with for emails and files and stuff like that, but this is now going to be a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, there has to be constraints around how much of that arrive when it arrives can we put up with a video realm.
So as we said, SDI content arrives continuously. You know, we have, you know, traffic flows, and they have moved from 1.5G to 3G, 6G. Some people listening to us now are probably using 12G SDI. So the only thing we've had to worry about when it comes to SDI is we use the term the quality of the road. So it's the cable, it's the connectors, it's the distance that we're putting these signals over. And that's where tools like iPattern and jitter measurement have become synonymous with the chief engineer when he's looking at signal quality within a facility. But when we move to IP, Steve, things change, don't they?
They most certainly do, Kevin.
Now,
our road can get a little more congested.
And that's a common theme you're going to see in the next 45 minutes or so, that congestion is probably our worst enemy. So to kind of summarize this, an SDI error that occurs with only one pixel is probably going to be almost impossible to spot within a picture.
Yeah, because it's only going to change the value of that pixel. The chances of the pixel going away is astronomical. But you take an error, and all you're going to do is imperceptibly change the value of that one pixel. You know, when you've got 2 million some odd pixels making a HD or 3G picture, it's one pixel that just barely changed value, you'll never see.
On the other hand, if you drop a packet,
yeah,
that's going to be pretty obvious.
Yeah, because receivers are going to do one of two things. Actually, most receivers absolutely go black because everything is shifted by a quarter of a line in a 1080 picture. So one IP packet is a quarter of a line of video in 1080. And as you can see, Lady Liberty scooted to the left. This is not a picture that I took in and edited. This was an actual error that I created. I dropped a packet, and this is the result of dropping a packet on a piece of video. And you can see the quarter line offset that this particular device did, and you can see the wraparound of the video. So we have to manage that because there is so much information in a single packet.
Yeah. So SDI video, we've all grown up with it. We know how it works. We know what to look for. But we're now moving into a world where, you know, the 7 layer of the OSI model, that's what we're about to go into. It's going to bring us incredible flexibility, but with it, it's going to bring us a different set of tools that we need to understand when it comes to analyzing and monitoring these networks.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want people to think that we're poo-pooing 2110. We are not at all. It's just we want to make sure that people understand some of the differences between SDI and 2110. 2110 opens the door, like Kevin just said, for flexibility and being able to do things. You've got a cable, a piece of glass going from point A to point B that has not unlimited bandwidth, but has horrendous bandwidth that we can utilize. And it's not 4 tons of copper weight.
Yeah. So as I said, we're not here to run a networking course, but these are the 7 layers of the OSI model. And your camera is going to connect to that. And you're going to send signals in the forms of bits and packets across the physical layer. And then in the receiving device, the reverse process is going to take place. And if everything works, you get a picture with audio and all your ancillary data. So where does 2110 fit into this world? Because obviously, you know, looks like we're going into somebody else's back garden now. We're playing with somebody else's ball on their pitch. And the great thing with where we're going is, for once, we're not the first people to do this. There are some very well-established standards, aren't there, Steve, by some very well-respected industry bodies, and not just broadcast now, that have been working on these for many years. And
90% of 2110 is reuse of existing standards that we are using for video.
And as you can see here, look at these. Some of these date back to 1980, which I jokingly say is probably older than some of the people on this call. So apologies for that one. But so the question that people ask is, where does 2110 fit into this? And it fits in at the session layer. And we're very fortunate at Leader that we have a vast array of products that can monitor and analyze the networks 2110 at a price point, and also at levels of feature and functionality they're going to satisfy basically most broadcasters and operators and engineers, haven't we, Steve?
Yes, we certainly do, Kevin.
So we've danced around it. Let's go into it. So what is 2110?
Yeah, it's essentially, like we've talked about, a suite of standards where we've got 2110-20, which is our video. We've got 2110-30, which is our audio, 2110-40, which is our data. It's almost like we took a step back into the days when we used to send individual essence, either color-wise or just audio video, and break the video up so we only send the raster, the active raster of the video, the active picture portion. We send just the audio, we send just the data. But what that opens up is the flexibility that we don't have to embed, de-embed, embed, de-embed every time we want to deal with a piece. Dealing with graphics and keying, all we're going to do is play with the video. When you deal with people talking, you're going to change audio. You just have to change the stuff in the audio flow. You don't have to mess with the video. And it's a lot cleaner and a lot easier to do in the long run.
And people have highlighted the savings that if you work in audio production, you don't need to build a network that's there to cater for these larger -20 video files.
Yes.
Because you don't need them. You can marry them back up at the end of the process.
Well, you think about professional sports. You could have 20 to 50 cameras sitting on a sporting event, and you're switching camera, but you still have the talent talking, and you don't have to turn around and take the talent's audio feed and embed it into the video, de-embed it out of the video, embed it into the video. They keep talking on their audio flow, and the switcher is switching just the video flow.
Yeah.
And it's so much simpler and cleaner.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, 2110 is a suite of standards, and we'll run through the -10 piece, which is the system timing and definition. -20, uncompressed active video. -30, which is PCM digital audio. And -40, which is ancillary data. But it's quite interesting if you look at the numbering here. The SMPTE have been quite clever and basically allowed for future expansion, haven't they, Steve?
Yes, yeah, you see each one of these goes by 10, so that we could have many different things come up as the standard evolves and the needs evolve, like you've shown here, Kevin. It's, 2110-21, the traffic shaping model, so we could define the buffer modeling to be able to handle what we refer to as narrow senders and wide senders. Wide senders being ones being done by a computer. There's actually even a -22 JPEG XS is even coming into the picture. -30, -31, the AES-3 transparent transport came out so that people could use the audio channel actually to transport data that had nothing to do with audio, but its biggest use is for compressed audio, things like Dolby and other compression technologies that are out there for multi-channel audio live on a AES-3-31 layer.
And we've recently seen -41 and -43 published.
Yes.
Which handle ancillary metadata in different ways.
Yes.
So watch this space and watch the numbers get filled in, basically, I think is the advice here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it just gave us room to grow.
So let's start off by having a look at 2110-10. So this is timing and definition. And this standard specifies that the system timing and requirements are common to all Essence streams. So it defines the various system clocks and RTP timestamp creations based on an IEEE 1588 standard and the SMPTE 2059-1 and -2 profiles, as well as AES 67. So once again, look, we're building on something that already exists. We're not the first people to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. PTP has been around for a long time. It's not new at all.
So one of the things you're going to need to be able to do, obviously, is have a secure, reliable and robust kind of PTP network. And we've done many sessions where we talk about the parameters of that. But then also you've got to be able to measure the video, haven't you, Steve, how that sits in relation. Because we'll talk in a minute that -20 is active video only, which means it doesn't start at line 0, pixel 0, does it?
No, it does not. It starts where the active video, which is after the vertical interval. So the timing portion of the vertical interval still exists because of legacy equipment. And we need to be able to seamlessly walk in and out of SDI. So SDI is still going to have that vertical interval offset. So we need to be able to have a timing model that offsets the video by that vertical interval amount.
So one of the tools that we strongly recommend you get familiar with is looking at these timings, and this is like PTP to RTP timestamps. And we have tools like the very traditional crosshair display that, you know, every engineer will be familiar with from SDI video compared to black and burst. But also IP is all about trends. So on the Leader products, we also have graphs, and these products can scale the graph anywhere from basically 2 minutes up to 72 hours. which allows you to see those trends, which could be absolutely critical in making sure that you take corrective action before something takes you off air.
Yeah.
And as Steve alluded to here, if you're in a world where you've got both SDI and IP, they've got to be synchronized together.
Yes,
So,
you need to make sure your PTP and your black signals, be it bi-level or tri-level, match each other, and they both start at the same point, which is going to be line 0, pixel 0, which you can see here that the PTP is perfectly in phase and in time with black, because they're 0 by 0 here.
then we've used the same graph, the same tool that everybody's familiar with, but now we're doing PTP RTP phase.
Yes.
And this is where you're going to see the first vertical phase offset.
Yes. Yeah. And so just depending on the frame rate that you are going into, you're going to have the vertical line offset of, at least for my side of the pond, if it's 1080i, 1080p, it's going to be, 1080i is going to be 21 lines out. 1080p is going to be 42 lines out. And UHD is the same as 3G, which is 42 lines of offset for that vertical interval. So that's when your time of the picture starts for pixel 0, line 0.
And again, you can see it here on the graph showing PTP to RTP comparison. And there's one other graph that we've added, which is PTP to first packet arrival type. So we'll go into this a bit more when we get onto the timing in -21. But again, with these three tools, you can very quickly and easily check the health of your system. Do my reference signals and my video, audio, and ancillary data, are they correctly timed? And you can see it on these graphs very simply.
Yeah, I can't tell you. So first packet time is the time, and we'll look at it in a little bit more. But that's reading the data into the buffer. So because IP has that little bit of wiggle of the packets, we actually have to buffer the data to be able to absorb that movement of the packets and have a clean output that we'll look at in just a little bit. And it's when is the time going into that network, and when that I'm reading into that buffer. And it's very important to be able to look at the RTP timestamps, because that's the timestamp of when that video frame was created. But am I reading into the buffer at the proper offset? And things will go. So
that leads us on to a nice little tool that I've not seen on any other products apart from the Leader 56 and 7600. And it's a mode called timestamp mode. And Steve, I think this is one that you've used on numerous occasions, haven't you, to fault find?
Most definitely, because believe it or not, the timestamps, the RTP timestamps or the first packet time are the equivalent of, if you're looking at your waveform monitor and you externally lock it, is the video stable? Is it rolling? Is it the time offset exactly where it should be, so everybody is in time? And with this timestamp mode that we have in the waveform monitor, a lot of people think that, okay, I'm going to put the video into these devices and I'm going to use PTP to do that. But a lot of devices basically FIFO the video in if they don't have to manage the video. Waveform monitors, multi-viewers, and a lot of those devices that we use and trust to tell us that the video is okay, completely ignore PTP, and they just take the packets as they're coming in and throw them on the screen and completely ignore PTP in doing that. And if PTP timing is off, your measurement device and your picture device you're looking at doesn't tell you you've got a really big issue.
So the great thing is on the 56 and 7600W that basically you can switch this off and on. So I use it as an analogy. It's like running SDI, but you're ignoring the reference now.
Yeah,
you're proving you've got a signal, but you've got a timing issue on it.
Yeah, if you have it turned on, it's like running external sync in SDI. You're synced to PTP to put the data into the waveform monitor. And this is where you can get in issues that may be unique, that the picture may start a quarter of a frame down. The top of the frame has nothing in it, and all of a sudden the top of your picture is actually a quarter of the way down the raster. And that's because the timing is offset. And if you turn the timestamp mode off and put it into free run mode or FIFO mode, boom, the picture comes perfect. And it will tell you very quickly that, hey, my timing model is not where it needs to be.
So dash 20, uncompressed active video. And here is the full technical description from the SMPTE paper. And I still find this amazing that the simplest way to explain this is to put up an analog waveform, Steve.
It is. So
do you want to explain on the left-hand side and then how that matches onto our analog waveform?
Sure. So you'll see a little black box in the top left corner of the green of the active video, and that's the start of active video for the first line in the frame. So that would correspond to the left side of our waveform, and that would happen all the way down to the bottom. And then once we get down to the bottom, we put another little marker in there. It's called an M bit that says, hey, I've hit the end of the frame, which would correspond to the far right-hand side of the last line of video. And that tells the 2110 system, okay, now the next packet I get a video is going to be for the first line of video for the next frame of video, but it's only for that active green area. The data that's in the vertical interval, what we commonly call the VANC, vertical ancillary data space, the horizontal ancillary data space, that is going to be handled in your dash 40 flow, unless it's the audio that would normally be in the horizontal interval, and that will go in your dash 31 flow or dash 30 flow.
So that's what we mean by active picture. Now, 2110-21, and we could probably spend the next 2 days talking about this one, but let's try and summarize it very concisely, Steve. So this is the traffic shaping and delivery timing for video. And the standard has defined 3 models that we're going to work to. So this is how senders and receivers should behave.
Yes.
And take it away, Steve.
Okay. So what you're looking at is a gap between each one of these groups of packets because we still have the time of the vertical interval. So at the beginning of the green packets is the start of the frame to the end of the frame. We've got that vertical interval. We're going to wait and not send any data. Then we start the next group of packets. And that happens, but then we need a buffer that is going to buffer that data so that we have a smooth train of continuous data to actually build the picture. And that's what 2110 1021 is about, is defining that buffer model and defining that timing, defining the offset of the video and where things go.
So this is the first they talk about, narrow, and these were basically the first models that we saw when 2110 first appeared, kind of back in 2018, because these are typically hardware devices.
And then go ahead.
I said we've evolved because we're now in a world where we're only moving the active picture. The Hank and Vank data, you know, are a separate essence. So that means we could now look at what we call narrow linear. And as you can see here, we've now got packets arriving at a nice regular interval. And once again, they go into the buffer, and this ensures that the receiving device has a nice steady flow of packets, and you have no interruption or quality of service issues.
So basically all we did was took the previous model and spread out all of those packets so that the timing fills that vertical interval gap and spreads the data out a little smoother, and it isn't quite so bursty. But gapped narrow is probably one of the larger formats you're actually going to see. There's not a lot of narrow linear devices that I have seen actually in use.
But the next one we're going to talk about is now starting to appear. And these are basically wide senders. So these are now devices that are software based. And obviously this is one of the big advantages of moving into the world of IP and 2110, that rather than having to replace hardware when you want to add new features and functionality, it can now be done in software. But it does mean that we've got to manage these devices because, as you can see here, the bitrate variation from a wide sender is a lot wider, which means we have to have a larger buffer.
Yes, the buffer went incredibly wide because the output of the device, the NIC or whatever it is that's putting out this IP stream, is now being controlled by the CPU. The CPU is doing everything else. So when it's time to put out a packet, it will put out that packet, but that time that it's going to put the packet out is going to be based on when it has time to go do that function. And that time that it has to go be able to put that packet out is going to vary a lot based on the CPU loading and what it's doing at that instant in time.
So what you must remember here is that if you've got a wide sender anywhere on your system and you want any device at the other end to receive that, they have to be capable of being a wide receiver, because otherwise the buffer's not going to be big enough, packets are going to get lost, and you'll have quality of service issues.
Yeah, this was one of the first things when they started making, just using a conventional 25 gig NIC and having a piece of software make the 2110 flow. They put it into devices, and I'd say 80% of the devices fell over.
So, next one, -30 PCM digital audio. And there are probably many people out here have been working for many years with audio over IP and AES-67. And what we've done is we've taken that great work and we've used it to allow us to handle the audio, haven't we, Steve, in these 2110 networks?
Yes. Again, the reuse of an existing standard.
And that then leads us on to -31, which, as you mentioned, AES-3 transparent transports. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is where Dolby Audio appears, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, Dolby D or Dolby E would be the two biggest ones that we run into using AES-3. And as it says, transparent transport. It doesn't care what the transport is, as long as it matches within the bandwidth that AES can handle. All of the pieces that would look for AES itself, all the signaling and pieces, it doesn't care about. It's just an open pipe. And that allows us to say, hey, this is Dolby D, and it goes. This is Dolby E, and it goes. The device or the packets, the transport will define what the data is.
So that's 31. And now dash 40. And again, we're piggybacking on SMPTE 291-1 ancillary data.
Yes.
Because as we've highlighted, we're only moving the active picture. So here we have, a fine example of, to an SDI engineer, what everything looks like, doesn't it, Steve?
Yeah. So, we've left all of those timing models in place for backwards compatibility. At least this side of the pond, think about it. We're still running 5994, not 60. And a lot of that, actually all of that, has to do with backwards compatibility with everything else we have that would never be able to wholesale replace in a broadcast network.
So those are the main 2110 standards that you're going to come across or you're going to be working with on a regular basis. But there are a couple of 2022 standards out there that will impact and you really should be aware of. So the first one we're going to look at here is 2022-6, transport of SDI over IP networks. And Steve, this was kind of the forerunner, wasn't it, of 2110?
Yes, it was. And basically, it took off from what a lot of us used to call SMPTE fiber, which was just putting SDI onto glass and just having it on fiber, putting SDI into IP packets, and then putting it on glass and transporting it from point A to point B. But it was everything. It was the entire SDI packet. The vertical interval, the horizontal interval, and the picture data. So anything that was in the SDI came out when you recovered the IP flow at the other end.
And that's led to it still being used a lot today, isn't it? Especially when it comes to play out and transport, over long distances.
Yeah,
because it's all together.
Yeah, it's still one of the best standards to get things across a WAN or a large network, because that way you can't get into issues where video and audio ever get out of time with each other, get through different transports, different paths. One can't get dropped. So it gives us the ability to have all of the benefits and features of 2110 within a smaller confined space where we can control everything that happens. But then when we need to send it, for thousands of miles, we can put it together and it won't get mangled or lost.
Yeah. So, don't think just because it's the oldest of the standards here when it comes to transporting video, audio, and ancillary data, that it's not relevant. It's actually very relevant in today's, production environments. The other one, 2022-7, seamless protection switching of RTP datagrams.
And it's deals with the whole reason we end up with typically what we're calling today red and blue networks. And it gives us the ability to cover that quarter packet that would be devastating if it got dropped. and it just seamlessly walks in and says, hey, if a packet's missing or out of time, I'm just going to take it from the other side. And it just sits there and goes back and forth.
So here we have an example where we've got our sender, and it's a -7 capable sender. So it's creating two streams, our red and our blue, which are going out into our red and blue networks. And then we have our RTP receiver. And the great term, I love it, the packet picker, Steve. I really like that expression, which basically selects the first packet that arrives and then creates a single stream.
Yes. And if you have a network that is running correctly on both the A and B, or red and blue, the output of that packet picker should be about a 50% loading. So 50% of the packet should be coming off of the red, 50% of the packet should be coming off of the blue. The blue network is not a backup network. They're both exactly the same networks. And it, as Kevin said, it's the first packet that comes in, and we're getting down to microsecond timing here, or even finer, that come into the front door of that packet picker. And that's the packet that's going to go out the door. And then, Kevin, what happens?
We have a network failure.
And in this case, those packets are either errored or they are missing. And the packet picker, because it's just going back and forth, who's first, it doesn't see those red packets there. So it just walks over and grabs the 3 packets from the blue network, 2 of which it was already going to take anyway, or 1 of them, and it replaces 2 of those red packets with the data from the blue seamlessly. It just says, hey, you got here first, that's who I'm taking.
So this is one of the things I always recommend. People ask me, so this 2110 stuff does actually work? We're broadcasters. We have to design systems to expect the most unexpected thing to happen at the most inopportune moment. So we can see why we've gone down this route of having, kind of built-in redundancy. But the other reason for this is, with these IP networks, you're now moving into a world where software updates will come at you like London buses. You'll get nothing for a couple of weeks, and then 3 or 4 of them will hit you straight away. Because obviously, most of those updates don't actually add features or functionality, but they're security patches and things that protect the well-being of your whole system. So by having a -7 system, if you don't have a testbed system, which we strongly recommend, because that's the place you should test any software updates before you put them on a live system, you've got the ability here to do either your red or your blue network, test it. If it works, then you do the other half. If it doesn't, you regress it back to the previous version of software, and you start a discussion with whoever issued that software patch to you.
Yeah. The other thing that you have to watch out for as the user of this 2110 network is it doesn't tell you, the devices on the receiving side don't tell you, hey, I'm taking all my data from the red, or I'm taking my data from the blue, or I'm taking it from both. And you really need to monitor this periodically to make sure that one of the networks hasn't gone wonky on you and you've been running on one side for the last day, 2 days, week, and you've lost your protection.
And that, again, is one of the great things on the 56 and 7600. There is a path delay graph that will show you, if you have completely lost one path.
Yes. Or if they've gone outside of what the packet picker says, hey, you need to show up within this interval, or I consider you gone.
And on the PHABRIX products, there is one fantastic feature, and you can probably see it in the bottom right-hand corner there under the ANCS data, that it says selected flows do not match.
Yes. So
It's telling you that your 2-7s, whether that be video, audio, or ancillary data, aren't actually a pair.
yeah, it's got different data in each one, different number of packets, which isn't supposed to happen.
It sure ain't.
That was amazing. And packet picker, my new favorite term. Yes, so many questions, and we will get to all your questions on this session or afterwards. So if we don't get to you in this next little bit of QA, no worries, we'll get to you afterward. So a question, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. As Cindy said, 100% of your questions will be answered. We don't have the time here to answer 100% of them, but Kevin and I will go through every single question and get back to everybody.
Yeah, so one of the questions is about PTP, and Fallon, if you wouldn't mind popping that PTP guide into the chat. A question is about PTP and what the acceptable jitter is. And maybe that's just a question for the guide, not to put you on the spot.
Well, there's two different jitters. One is the arrival of the packets themselves, and the other jitter is the change in time that those packets actually are giving you. There are devices within PTP that measure what the delay is from the grandmaster, the device making the PTP, getting down to the receiver. And it measures the delay forward and measures the delay backwards and tells the receiver, this is how much network delay I have. And the receiving device will take that out. And honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember the standard and exactly how much is acceptable there. But the other one that is critical then is within those packets, after you remove the network, how much is PTP moving? And basically, if you have 1 microsecond of movement in time, what I have found is that's where receivers fall over. You got to stay under that PTP movement under 1 microsecond. And most devices are down around, probably 0.5 or lower microseconds of actual time movement that needs to be smoothed out in the receiver.
Good. Thank you for that. And then there's a link to the guide in the chat so you can get into all the detail in addition to what Steve just shared there.
And the measurement devices, the waveform monitors on the PTP screens will give you that data. And like Kevin said, the Leader devices actually have the ability to take both of those measurements and actually give you a 72-hour graph, so that if something happened in the middle of the night, you can go back and look and say, hey, at XYZ time, we had this. Well, what else was going on in the facility when that happened? And was there an external cause for it? Or is this something I need to start watching for?
All right, another question. In the government space, we have a requirement to encrypt all IP traffic. Is encryption included in the 2110 standard? We're researching right now the switch from SDI to 2110.
No.
There's a whole body of work going on about security around these networks. But no, it is not encrypted.
Another question here is, would you de-embed or convert a 2022-6 to 2110 when stripping its audio or data apart, or is that just one way of doing things?
Run that by me one more time, please.
Yeah, would you de-embed or convert a 2022-6 to 2110 when stripping its audio or data apart?
Probably not.
No, okay.
Okay, there's no reason to go to another standard just to do that one function. It's going to be done the same way that we have de-embedders now that we use in SDI. There's no reason to go to a 2110 to get those apart from each other and go back. But that is one of the nice things that 2110 does allow us, that we only have to deal with that one flow. We don't have to de-embed and re-embed.
So is seamless protection an absolute necessary? At what point do you duplicate the stream to stream A and stream B? Where in the data transmit pipeline do you break out the packets?
It's in the device, you know, if it's a playout server, the playout server is going to make two identical paths with different multi addresses. And those are going to go from origination to termination. Is it necessary? Yes. Only because of how catastrophic a single packet error is. And you need to remember that IP switches do not transport a corrupted packet. If you have a corrupted packet come into a switch, the switch throws the packet away. And if you really think about it, it's a necessary thing to do in IP, in that it may be part of the address field that's actually corrupted, and all of a sudden the video could actually show up on top of somebody else's video. And I always term it that, you know, think about watching TV at home, and the last thing you want is your kids sitting there watching Sesame Street, and then all of a sudden you get a change in just the address of a different field, and all of a sudden the woohoo channel shows up on top of Johnny, and Johnny goes running to Mama going, Mama, what's that? And, you know, and think about, most of us have direct deposit in our paychecks. And if you have that error in direct deposit, you know, there are protocols within that they can go back and forth and take care of. So we have to drop the data in a switch. There is no way to not drop the data and have it be reliable. You know, the stock exchange, you don't want, you know, you bought this and you come up with a completely different stock.
I have got a question here that seems just right on point with both of you, Kevin and Steve. How does PTP handle Grandmaster failover in a SMPTE ST2110 network, and what best practices should be followed to avoid sync disruptions?
So there's a multi-chain in that the Grandmaster journey feeds a boundary clock and a switch that is feeding all of the receivers, and that's just to reduce traffic back to the Grandmaster, because PTP is very verbose, talking back and forth. But the second network, the second Grandmaster, is listening to the first Grandmaster, and there's priorities in there that you set up that the second Grandmaster is looking at. That priority says, hey, you're lower priority, so you're going to be the Grandmaster. I'm just going to sit here and listen to you. The minute you falter, I just walk in and take over. You're both locked to GPS. You both have the same exact timestamps, and it just seamlessly, this one falters, this one walks in, and it just keeps right on going. It's all done in the IP domain. And it's just, yes, you do have to see the error or see the lack of the signal, but it's in the millisecond time. The receivers have enough within the receiver to stay in time for the loss of that packet. There's still a phase lock loop in there, and the phase lock loop will keep running and keep running in time. And all of a sudden, okay, yes, I don't get PTP for 3 PTP packets, but within 3 PTP packets, typically, the second Grandmaster just walks right on and just keeps right on going.
One of the things we'd have been asked a lot over here in Europe about is I lose GPS, and I'm losing it to the whole lot now. So maybe I've got 3 or 4 SPGs, but I've just lost GPS. And on the Leader products, so we're talking about the LT4670 here, they will go into what we call stay in sync mode, because they've got their own internal oscillator, and they will run quite happily. And then when GPS returns, they will do a slow sync. So we're familiar from this from Black and Burst, tri-level sync, and the audio, but it also does it with PTP as well. So this will now nice and slowly bring it back together and not cause an interruption to service. The other thing, and we're not going to go into this in detail, but if you're running a hybrid environment with Black and Burst and PTP, and your best master clock routine switches to a new grandmaster, how does SDI and Black and Burst know that that's changed? Because the emergency changeover unit doesn't know about it, does it, Steve?
No, it does not. So it needs to be told that, hey, my grandmaster has walked over to the second unit for some reason, and you want to walk your ECO over to that same unit. So you really want your ECO to switch to backup, so that when the maintenance engineer goes in to figure out what's wrong and he takes that SPG out, you don't get the hit from crashing the SPG on all your black signals. You want PTP to walk over to the second grandmaster. You want all your black and SDI walk over to that second SPG. And then when it's fixed, you want them both to walk back. And there are things in place within the Leader product to be able to do that for you.
This was such a good session on ST 2110. What's it all about? We have more questions. We're going to circle back to you offline and take care of all of your questions. Yes, there's a replay. All of this will be available to you. Steve and Kevin, you're amazing. Thank you so much for all the great info.
Yes,
Cindy, thank you.
We will be posting this presentation on the Leader YouTube sites in the States and in Europe, and have it there for you after this presentation.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. As I said, if you think of any questions that we maybe didn't cover here, I think most of you have got Steve and I's contact details. So ping us a mail. We'll be more than happy to look at them. If there's a subject that you think would benefit from Steve and me having a chat for an hour, let us know, because it's actually quite fun putting these together. And hopefully, you know, we're here to educate and inform and have a bit of fun along the way as well, aren't we?
Yes, yes. You got to make work enjoyable and fun. Otherwise, it's not.
So thank you, everybody, once again. And keep a lookout, because we'll be back with another subject very soon, won't we, Steve?
Yes, we will.